Before steel met flesh, before shields shattered and blood soaked the earth, war sometimes announced itself with sound alone. Not the clash of swords, but fear made audible. Across ancient battlefields, there were moments when soldiers knew death was coming long before they saw it. At Burnswark Hill, on a lonely ridge in what is now Scotland, Rome unleashed one of its most unsettling weapons. Not loud with explosions, not grand in size, but terrifying in effect. A weapon that screamed through the air and struck the mind before it struck the body. This is the story of Rome's whistling sling bullets, how they worked, why they were made, and what they reveal about the empire's deep understanding of fear as a tool of war. It cut through the air with a piercing shriek, high sharp, relentless. A sound unlike anything the defenders had ever heard. Before a single soldier fell, the noise alone warned them. Death was already on its way. Small lead sling bullets, no larger than grapes, spun through the sky. Holes drilled cleanly through their bodies turned them into screaming projectiles, howling like spirits as they flew. And yet, despite their terror, most people today have never even heard of them. These were Rome's whistling sling bullets, a quiet masterpiece of psychological warfare. Small enough to rest in the palm of a hand, but powerful enough to shake entire armies. How did these drilled bullets actually produce sound? Why did the Romans invest time and effort into crafting them? What would it have felt like to stand beneath that screaming rain of lead? And what do they tell us about the ruthless intelligence behind Rome's military machine? To answer that, we have to begin at Burnswark Hill. Burnswark Hill rises as a wind-scoured ridge in southwestern Scotland. At a glance, it looks unremarkable, just farmland and stone under open sky. But beneath its surface, archaeologists uncovered something extraordinary, one of the densest concentrations of Roman missile debris ever found in Britain. Hundreds of lead sling bullets, glands scattered across the slopes. Carved red sandstone ballista stones. Dozens upon dozens of iron arrowheads. What makes this discovery so striking is the imbalance. Archaeological surveys showed that only about 3% of the recovered lead fragments could not be linked to Roman weaponry. That number alone raises an alarm. This was no practice field. Something violent, focused, and deliberate happened here. By the mid-2nd century AD, Rome had pushed its reach almost as far north as it believed the world allowed. Beyond lay the lands of the Caledonians and the Selgovi, tribes who refused subjugation. Under Emperor Antoninus Pius, around 140 AD, Rome advanced beyond Hadrian's Wall and erected a new frontier, the Antonine Wall. It was a statement of dominance. A line drawn in turf and timber that said, Rome still advances. But walls did not bring peace. Northern tribes continued to raid, ambush, and burn Roman positions. Each claim of control was met with defiance. And standing squarely in the middle of this tense frontier zone was Burnswark Hill. The hill itself is a natural fortress, steep-sided, flat-topped, rising nearly 300 meters above the surrounding land. At its summit sat an Iron Age hill fort, positioned like a watchful eye over local routes. That vantage point made it indispensable and dangerous from Rome's perspective. Today, it rests quietly in Dumfries and Galloway. In the 2nd century, it was likely a fortified Selgovian stronghold commanding movement, trade, and resistance. The scale of the Roman assault becomes clear when the battlefield is mapped. Missile impacts stretch along nearly half a kilometer of the fort's defensive ramparts, not concentrated at gates, but spread across a wide front. Training exercises don't look like this. Practice targets cluster fire. This didn't. It blanketed the defenses. When you combine that spread with the overwhelming dominance of Roman projectiles, the same 97% figure, the intent becomes unmistakable. This was heavy, sustained long-range fire designed to pin, overwhelm, and break defenders fast. Burnswark is unique in another way. The hill is wedged between two Roman camps, one to the south, one to the north. This configuration is rare in Britain and highly revealing. These were not temporary camps thrown up for drills. The southern camp functioned as the primary assault base, positioned for direct line-of-sight bombardment. The northern camp, smaller but carefully placed, likely existed to seal escape routes. The southern camp featured 3 broad gates facing the hill fort. Just beyond them lay massive earthworks, later nicknamed the Three Brethren. These platforms aligned perfectly with the fort's gateways, suggesting they were built to mount ballistae, heavy torsion-powered siege weapons capable of smashing defenses with terrifying force. So the Romans layered their attack. Ballista stones and bolts slammed into the fort structures. Archers and slingers filled the air with arrows and whistling lead, constant, fast, and inescapable. It was suppression by design. Physical damage paired with psychological collapse. For nearly 2 centuries, scholars debated what Burnswark represented, a battlefield or a Roman training ground. From the 19th century onward, both interpretations competed. But modern archaeology tipped the scales. The 2015 Battlefield Project brought clarity through hard data. Projectile density across half a kilometer, specialized whistling sling bullets made solely for psychological impact, artillery platforms aligned on targets, and an overwhelming presence of combat debris. Training camps don't need terror weapons. They don't require carefully engineered sound projectiles. They don't abandon forts afterward. And Burnswark was abandoned. After the assault, the hill fort was never reoccupied. Silence followed violence. That absence speaks volumes. Every piece of evidence now points toward a real military operation, a short, ferocious bombardment intended to terrify, dominate, and force submission without prolonged siege. At Burnswark Hill, Rome didn't just aim to defeat an enemy. It aimed to break their will with sound, fear, and precision. Now let's step back and widen the lens to understand how Rome fought wars at distance. When most people imagine a Roman army, they picture dense ranks of heavy infantry, the legionaries, marching forward with shields locked in pila, those famous short javelins ready to fly. And that image isn't wrong. The legion was the backbone of Roman power. But in many battles, the real momentum came from layers behind the legions, troops whose job was not to charge, but to soften, disrupt, and intimidate. These forces were the auxilia, non-citizen specialists drawn from regions renowned for particular skills. Rome understood something critical. Not every soldier needed to fight the same way. Archers came from Syria, cavalry from Gaul and Thrace. And some of the most feared ranged fighters came from the Balearic Islands, legendary slingers trained from childhood, capable of terrifying accuracy at long distance. Before Roman infantry ever closed in, these specialists went to work. They harassed defenders, broke formations, and blanketed enemy positions in constant fire. That context brings us back to Burnswark Hill and to one of the strangest, most revealing artifacts found there, a specific type of sling bullet archaeologists classify as type 3 glands. These bullets are immediately different. Smaller than standard sling ammunition, elongated in shape, cast in lead, and most striking of all, each features a carefully drilled hole in its body. They weigh roughly 20 to 30 grams, light enough for speed, heavy enough to hurt. At first glance, that hole looks puzzling. Casting error? Damage? But archaeologists, led by John Reed of the Trimontium Trust, proposed a far more deliberate explanation. Those holes weren't flaws. They were features. The idea is simple and unsettling. When these hollowed bullets flew through the air, airflow passed through the cavity and produced a high-pitched shriek. A whistling or howling sound meant less to wound than to terrify. In other words, these were purpose-built psychological weapons. Imagine standing on a hilltop fort as dozens, then hundreds of unseen projectiles screamed toward you through the air. You wouldn't just feel attacked, you'd feel hunted. And the archaeological record suggests Rome believed this worked. At Burnswark, Researchers sorted the recovered lead glands into three main types. Type 1 were the classic lemon-shaped bullets, heavy, solid, brutal, some weighing up to 60 grams. These were the power hitters. Type 2 were acorn-shaped, mid-weight rounds likely used for general combat. And then there was Type 3, the elongated, lightweight bullets with drilled holes, the odd ones out. Here's the detail that changes everything. Roughly 20% of all sling bullets recovered at the site have drilled holes. 1 in 5. That's not random damage or experimentation. That's a standardized choice applied at scale. Type 3 bullets, in particular, show consistency. Similar weights, similar shapes, controlled dimensions. That tells us they weren't improvised. They were manufactured according to a pattern. Reports on hole size vary. Some are extremely small, measured at under a millimeter, while others reach 4 or 5 millimeters wide and several millimeters deep. The precise measurements differ, but the intention does not. The hole appears again and again, stamped into the design. So why weaken a projectile by drilling into it? From a purely ballistic standpoint, these bullets weren't ideal. They flew shorter distances, carried less momentum, and were less effective at punching through shields compared to heavier solid glands. If killing power was the only goal, these designs make no sense. Unless killing wasn't the point. Physics gives us part of the answer. When air is forced over a cavity or sharp edge at speed, it can oscillate, creating sound. Think of blowing across a bottle or a whistle. The drilled holes turn these bullets into airborne noisemakers. And psychology does the rest. A sudden, high-pitched scream overhead disrupts focus, spikes stress, and feeds panic. Sometimes breaking morale matters more than breaking bones. That choice also tells us something crucial about Roman logistics. Drilling holes into lead bullets takes time. Skill, labor. This wasn't a shortcut. The fact that a significant fraction of the ammunition was altered this way means the decision came from above. Someone authorized extra effort to produce fear, not just casualties. That's not improvisation. That's strategy. There's a paradox here. Rome willingly sacrificed some physical effectiveness to amplify psychological impact. In an army famous for efficiency and practicality, that trade-off speaks volumes. You only accept it if you believe fear will multiply force enough to justify the cost. Over the years, alternative explanations surfaced. Some suggested the holes were meant to carry poison. After all, ancient cultures did experiment with toxic projectiles. But that theory collapses quickly. Many holes are far too small to hold any meaningful dose, sometimes less than half a millimeter wide. And tactically, it makes no sense to place poison in the lightest, least penetrating missiles. If poison were the intent, it would appear in heavier rounds designed to strike flesh. What remains is the simplest explanation and the one supported by evidence. The hole was meant to make noise. There are two likely mechanisms. One is the edge tone effect. Fast-moving air interacting with the hole produces a sustained oscillation, a whistle. The other involves the bullet acting like a tiny Helmholtz resonator, where an internal cavity amplifies the sound, turning a brief whoosh into a sharp, lingering buzz capable of cutting through battlefield chaos. Modern experiments reinforce this interpretation. Reconstructions of Type 3 glands based on archaeological dimensions, tested by slinging specialists working with the Trimontium Trust, do produce audible buzzing and whistling sounds. But those tests likely understate the effect. Ancient professional slingers, funditors, trained relentlessly and could hurl projectiles faster than most modern demonstrations achieve. Higher velocity means higher pitch and louder sound. What we hear today as a buzz may once have been a shriek. Now imagine the real moment. Dawn breaks. Roman troops deploy from both camps. Artillery crews prepare scorpions and small ballistae. Slingers, perhaps Balearic or Syrian auxiliaries, take position. These weren't amateurs. In skilled hands, a sling could deliver accurate fire at distances exceeding 120 meters. The impact energy of a well-thrown stone could rival the sudden blunt trauma of a modern handgun. That is why Rome recruited specialists, and why places like Burnswark were never just targets. They were messages. The manpower gathered around Burnswark tells us immediately how seriously Rome took this operation. Units known to have been stationed in nearby forts included cohors I Nerviorum, cohors I Germanorum Miliaria Equitata, and later cohors I Tingorum, mixed infantry and cavalry auxilia originally recruited from Germanic and Belgic regions. Add to that documentary traces of the 6th and 22nd Legions operating in the area, and a clear picture emerges. This was not a token force. It was a combined formation built for decisive action. Professional slingers, disciplined legionary infantry, and dedicated artillery crews working in coordination. Rome didn't improvise here. It orchestrated. Archaeology, paired with tactical logic, allows us to reconstruct how the Romans likely executed the attack. What emerges is a choreography of suppression and shock, methodical, overwhelming, and frankly brutal in its elegance. When the order came, the violence didn't rise gradually. It detonated. The opening phase was pure range dominance. Ballistae sat atop prepared platforms, including the massive earthworks known today as the Three Brethren in the southern Roman camp. From there, crews hurled stone projectiles weighing between roughly 600 and 1,100 grams. These are not random shots. They were aimed to smash gates, fracture parapets, and tear literal gaps into the defensive structure. Heavy bolts slammed into ramparts while archers and slingers flooded the fortifications with lead. Type 1 glands, heavy, solid, lethal, did the physical damage. Type 3 glands did something else entirely. Roughly 1 in 5 sling bullets was engineered to whistle. Their purpose was not accuracy, but saturation, overloading the defenders' senses across the entire frontage. This wasn't about focusing everything on a single gate. It was about pressure everywhere. And here's where sound becomes tactical. Slingers could deliberately concentrate whistling fire along a specific stretch of rampart. Type 3 bullets were less lethal, but highly disorienting. Their scream forced defenders to move, to bunch together, to abandon exposed positions, or to duck for cover. Once defenders shifted, heavier and more lethal weapons could exploit the disruption. It was a two-step trap. Sound of forced movement, forced to finish the job. The numbers make the effect clearer. A trained slinger could release 3 or 4 stones in rapid succession. Now imagine 100 slingers firing nearly at once. That's around 400 projectiles in a single salvo. If 20% were whistling bullets, then roughly 80 shrieking missiles would tear through the air simultaneously. 80. That is not background noise. It's an auditory assault layered on top of crashing stone and steel. The whistling bullets didn't need to kill. Their mission was to exhaust nerves, fracture attention, and crack morale. Picture the defender's experience. You're on the rampart, holding your position. Then suddenly the air itself turns hostile. High-pitched screams whip past your head from every direction. You can see massive stones smashing into gates. Regular sling bullets are already hammering the line. And threaded through it all is this relentless, mechanical buzz, impossible to locate, impossible to ignore. How long could anyone stand that? Human hearing is deeply primal. Sudden, unpredictable noise drives adrenaline, destroys coordination, and accelerates panic. Shouts replace commands. Defenders glance backward, duck instinctively, abandon positions. Response is slow. Gaps form, and those gaps are exactly what Roman infantry were trained to exploit. There's also an intriguing possibility worth mentioning. Some reconstructions suggest the whistling barrage may have masked the sounds of Roman movement, covering the noise of troops advancing, ladders being moved, or units shifting into assault formation. It's speculative, but plausible. While defenders reeled under sonic pressure, Roman forces could maneuver unseen and unheard. Meanwhile, ballistae on the three brethren platforms continued hammering strong points. Some estimates suggest these engines launched stones heavy enough, over a kilogram, to shatter wooden gate structures outright. With defenders pinned, distracted, or displaced, legionary infantry advanced in disciplined formations. Shields locked, testudo if necessary. They moved not into chaos, but into openings deliberately created moments earlier. Logistics mattered too. Ballistae were devastating but slow and expensive to supply. Sling bullets were the opposite, small, cheap, and abundant. That allowed slingers to maintain a continuous curtain of fire while artillery punctured defenses. The result was exactly what Burnswark suggests: a short, overwhelming assault, not a prolonged siege. What Burnswark reveals is tactical sophistication. Rome wasn't relying solely on brute force. It was integrating heavy artillery, mass missile fire, and psychological pressure into a unified doctrine. Slingers, fundators, weren't peripheral units. They were central to how the operation worked. Auxiliary cohorts, such as the Tungri and Nervii, combined with legionary detachments, provided the coordination and discipline required to execute such a plan smoothly. And the aftermath matters. The hill fort at Burnswark was never reoccupied. Whether this was a punitive attack or a calculated display of power, the message was unmistakable. Rome didn't merely defeat the hilltop stronghold, it erased it as a statement. This is where comparison becomes illuminating. Greek armies experimented with silence, hollow clay sling bullets designed to carry poison. Their approach was subtle, invisible, lethal without announcement. The Romans chose the opposite path. They wanted noise. Where others whispered, Rome roared. At Burnswark Hill, warfare became spectacle. Modern historians call it an episode of exemplary force. In plain language, it was a warning, not just to the defenders of that fort, but to every tribe watching from the hills beyond. This is what resistance sounds like. Those whistling sling bullets are not just artifacts. They are echoes of a strategy that fused engineering, psychology, and intimidation. Rome conquered land, yes, but more importantly, it mastered emotion. Fear was engineered. Submission was designed. And maybe that's the real lesson. Ancient warfare wasn't only about blades and blood. It was theater. Every crash, every scream, every whistle was part of a carefully staged performance of dominance. So when you imagine a Roman battlefield, don't just see it. Listen.